Hey everyone, and welcome to another Tuesday tip where in this week's video we're going to be talking about how to install a new bike chain. So if you're new here, every Tuesday I try to make a tips and tricks video on everything from how to work on your bike, how to make working on your bike easier, or how to do a trick on your bike. As I said before, we're going to be talking about how to install a new chain this week. We're going to be talking about everything from breaking the chain to putting the chain back together using a master link and without using a master link. And we're going to be covering the Odyssey Keychain, which is my favorite chain because it goes back together without a master link and without having to use a chain breaker. You actually use an Allen wrench and the pin that comes with the chain to put it back together and take it off. So let's get started. To start things off, let's talk about the tools that we're going to need to install a new chain. The first thing is if you're going to be using a master link, I've always used needle nose pliers to put them back together, but you can use everything from keys to just anything that you can use to push or take off the master link. You're going to need a size 3 Allen wrench if you're going to be using the Odyssey Keychain. For any chain, no matter what, if you have to break it, you're going to need a chain breaker and you're going to need the chain itself. Installing a new chain is pretty straightforward, so the first thing that we're going to do is take the chain out of the box and we're going to find out how long the chain needs to be as well as where we need to break it. If you can see here, there's some grease inside this bag, so be aware. You're going to get dirty while doing this. So there's our new chain, and the first thing that we're going to do is put it on the bike as if it were installed to see where it overlaps and where we need to break it. And to do this, you're going to want to put your wheel in the position that you would ideally want to have it, because the whole point of this is to find out where the chain needs to go to fit where you like to keep your wheel. So now we're going to put the chain onto the front sprocket or chain wheel and the driver of the back wheel in order to see how long the chain needs to be. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to reach in and around things, but what we're looking for here is where the chain overlaps. And with a little bit closer of a look here, we can get a better idea of where we need to break the chain at. So no matter what chain you have, you need to pay attention to the fact that there are inside and outside plates, and the ends of your chain need to line up. This is usually where I have problems because I'll break the chain to where both ends have outside plates, and if both ends are bigger like right here, they can't line up. The way that chains work is we have our inside and outside plates and they always have to line up. So we need to make sure that where we break the chain at is either an inside or outside plate that matches the opposite end of the chain. And now this is a very important part that I need to add in here when it comes to using master links with chains, because the ends of the chains itself are different than if you're not going to use a master link. And that is that when you use a master link, if you look here, both ends of the chain are on inside plates. That's something that you need to take into consideration because the master link itself becomes an outside plate, which means that both ends of the chain need to be broken on inside plates. So with the Odyssey Keychain, the last 2 links of the chain itself on this side are master link Allen wrench pins for installing and removing the chain. One of them is a half link and the other one is a normal link. The half link comes pre-installed just to make things easier if it's necessary, but in this case, we do not need this half link at all. If we take off this half link and we look at the very next plate, we see that it's also an outside plate, and then if we look at the bottom, we see that if we broke the chain right here, what would be left is an inside plate to line up with our master Allen wrench link of the chain. Another thing you'll want to pay attention to here is the location of your wheel in the dropout in relation to where the chain lines up. If you look here, you'll see that the chain overlaps the inside plate, meaning that the wheel is going to have to go back in order to compensate for how loose the chain's going to be if we connect it here. This is something that you absolutely need to take into consideration because sometimes you can only move your wheel forward or you can only move it backwards, or you can't move it at all and you have to use a half link in order to make things line up properly so that your wheel sits safely in the dropout. So in looking at this again, what I'm deciding is that it's probably better to loosen the wheel and push it forward in order to make the half link meet up with this inside plate here than it is to pull the wheel backwards to tighten the chain if I used this inside plate. So we're going to break the chain on this link right here. And this is where you need to make sure that you keep track of the link you're going to break because it's very easy to lose. You could even use a Sharpie and write on it or mark it somehow, but usually what I do is just grab the link and don't let go of it no matter what when taking the chain off of the bike. Another thing you can do is count the number of pins back to the one that you're going to break. This is the 8th pin, so now even if I lose the place, all I have to do is count back from the end of the chain to get to where I need to break it. And this whole process is pretty much the same no matter what chain you have. You need to make sure that where you break it on one end matches up with the other end, and sometimes take into consideration that you can use a half link if it doesn't line up properly with your wheel where it needs to be. So let's get to the chain breaker and break this chain. Right here I have the Shadow Conspiracy chain breaker tool. This is the one I'm going to be using to do this, and this should work on most and any other chain that you need to break. When it comes to the hollow Odyssey keychain, it comes with an adapter for the chain breaker pin, because without this adapter going into the hollow pin itself, the pin of the chain breaker will get stuck in the pin of the chain and it's extremely hard to get them out. So it comes with this adapter so that that doesn't happen. The adapter is the exact size of the pin itself because with this chain, the pins are way bigger than in other chains. That being said, we can put the adapter onto the pin of the chain breaker and break the chain at the 8th pin that we talked about. It's pretty simple to put the adapter on. I just run the pin outward far enough to where we can get the adapter onto the pin itself. Sometimes it's a little difficult, but there it goes. So now that we've got the adapter onto the chain breaker pin, we can take our chain at the 8th link that we counted, and if you're unsure, put it back on the bike and double check, because this is something that is a huge pain in the butt if you get it wrong. Being 100% certain that this is the pin that I need to take out of the chain, we can put the chain into the chain breaker just like this. Most chain breakers are going to be the same, and if there are 2 plates on your chain breaker, you want to put it in the plate that goes against the most solid part of the chain breaker. You can see that this is solid metal, so that pushing on this is going to be pushing against something more solid than the chain. If you put it to the left here and make it so that this plate right here in the chain is what it's against, when you go to take this pin out, it's just going to bend that plate and push through it and get to this point anyways, because that plate is not strong enough to withstand the power that it takes to push one of these links out of the chain. And now that we've got the chain on the breaker and the adapter on the pin, we can start tightening the handle until the adapter goes into the chain pin itself. As you can see there, now that it tightens up, we just want to make sure that everything is good as we continue to tighten, because we do not want to break anything. And you'll see that it gets to a point where we have to start tightening pretty hard. But at this point, you kind of just want to look around the chain and chain breaker and make sure that everything is lining up properly and that nothing is in the way of the pin coming out. Depending on the chain that you have and the size of the pins in it, you want to look at this valley on the other side where the pin of the chain has to go when it's pushed out, because in some cases the pin on the Odyssey keychain and possibly other chains is bigger than this valley, and that won't allow the pin to come out of the chain, so you'll be tightening extremely hard and nothing will be happening. So you definitely want to look around and just make sure everything's good. Everything looks good here, so we're just going to keep tightening. And I'm doing this with my left hand, but things get a little bit easier the more you go. You can see the pin is being pushed out of the chain. It's really not that difficult once you break it loose. Now it's at this point that I need to point out something that can make installing your chain 100 times easier if you're going to be using the method of using a pin itself with no master link to put your chain back together. And that is, if you're breaking the chain and the end of the chain itself is going to be on one of these outside plates, you want to stop at the point where you get the pin far enough through to break the chain and pull it apart without the pin coming out of the outside link. Because when you do that, you have your pin already ready to be pushed back in, and all you have to do is line up with the other side of the chain and flip the chain around and push it back in. And this is something that I'm going to show later on with a different style of chain, but I just wanted to point it out now. At this point though, we do not need this pin in here, so we can push it the rest of the way out and continue with the installation. And if you notice there, the difference between the pin still being in there and being pushed out was all of a millimeter. So this is a very fine line that you want to pay attention to, because once you get that pin out of there, it is extremely hard to put it back in, and you might as well break the remaining links at a different point and put things back together that way. But now we can back off the chain breaker and take the adapter out of the chain just like that, and the chain just falls apart, exactly like what we needed. So now we can give a better demonstration of how important it is to break the chain in the right place. And as you can see, we have inside plates on the end of the chain here, and this half link widens out to be an outside plate, and with the little circle piece there, things line up perfectly. But had we broken the chain on the outside plate, we would have two outside plates lining up here, and as you can see, that does not work and would not work properly, and we would have to start over. So now that I've showed you how to break the chain itself, we can start talking about the different methods that chains are installed. And to install the chain, we do exactly like what we did to find out where we needed to break it, and we put it back on the bike. And the first method that we're going to talk about is the method of using a master link. Now, a master link is usually made up of three different pieces. We have the piece with our pins on it, we have a plate with two holes in it, and then the pin or clip or master link piece itself. And to do this, all we have to do is take the two ends of our chain, and we can put the plate through one end, and we want to make sure we put the pin through the chain facing outward on the bike, so that we're not trying to work through the bike itself to put things together. And now that we've put it through one end of the chain, we can grab the other end of the chain, put it onto the pin, we can put our plate on, and then we put on our clip itself. So whenever you're putting on this clip, you want to make sure that you're putting it on facing backwards on the bike, so that the open side is facing away from the pedaling direction of the chain. So we're going to put this clip on here, and at this point we can grab our pliers or whatever we're using to push this clip onto the chain, and it's that simple. The chain is installed. So since I'm going to be taking off this master link anyways, I might as well show you how to do it. And it's pretty simple and the exact opposite of what we just did. You take your tool or whatever you're going to use to take this clip and push it off of the pin, and you push it off like so. Sometimes it can go flying like it just did. You want to make sure that you keep an eye on it. You take your plate off and take one side of your chain off and take the other side off. And it's pretty simple. Master links are very easy to work with. There's a couple different styles of them out, but they all work pretty similarly, to where you're just putting one side of the chain onto it and then the other side and then clipping it. The next style of connecting a chain back together that we're going to be talking about is the Odyssey Keychain itself. This one is pretty simple, and another thing that I really like about how this goes back together is that there's a little lip on the plate of the master link pins that use Allen keys. And all you have to do to put it back together is stretch the chain and put the inside plate onto that lip, and it holds itself together, as you can see here, so that you can put the other pieces in. It's pretty simple, and now all we have to do is take our Allen wrench pin and put it into the chain and tighten it down. Once again, if you guys are using the Odyssey keychain, you want to make sure that you install it with the Allen key pins facing outward so that you can use the Allen wrench on this side of the bike rather than having to work through the rim and through the bike. It just makes things easier, and that is the way that Odyssey tells you to install it in the instructions. One other thing that I wanted to mention about the keychain is that this adapter right here is the reason why I recommend getting a hollow pin keychain over the solid pin. This adapter fits perfectly into the pin on the keychain, and if for some reason you do break this chain and have to put it together using a pin by itself, the pin will sit on the adapter and hold itself, whereas with the solid pin version, there's nothing for the pin to hold on to, so you have to find a way to hold it with pliers or with something in order to push it back into the chain, and it's way more difficult to put this chain back together with the pins when you have a solid pin version of it versus the hollow. So I 100% recommend the hollow version keychain over the solid. Alright, so the last method of installing a chain that I'm going to be talking about in this video is the method of not using a master link at all and just pushing a pin through the chain so that it's exactly the same as every other link on the chain itself. And as you can see, this chain isn't long enough to install on the bike, so we're just going to do it not on the bike, and you can pretend. And if you're going to do it this way, you can just mimic what I'm doing but on the bike. So as you can see, we've already talked about how you want to leave a pin partially in the outer plate of the chain, but I'm going to go ahead and take this one off and show you an example of how to do it. And it's really pretty simple. You just take the chain and you put it into the chain breaker, and since we're not using the keychain, we don't need any extra adapters, and we just start tightening on the pin. I'm just pushing the pin out of the chain. You can see it slowly working its way out. And you just want to make sure that when you do this, you stop at the point where the pin is just barely in the outside plate and the chain will come apart. So I think we got it far enough here. Take it out of the chain breaker and just pull on it a little bit. There we go. And as you can see, the pin is just in the outside plate, ready to be pushed back in when we put the chain back together, just like this. So this is exactly what you would do if it was on the bike. We would have the chain around the sprocket and the driver, and we would orient it so that the pin is sticking out the outside so that we can easily get the chain breaker onto it. We're going to just pretend like it's on the bike, loosen the chain breaker enough to get the chain into the breaker. And if you have the shadow chain breaker and you want to play it safe, or if the plates on your chain move independently like they do on this chain, moving just like this, the shadow chain breaker comes with this little pin in the bottom that you can put through the outside hole like this into the chain to ensure that everything stays lined up while you're tightening the pin into the chain. So we can get everything lined up, use this pin to make sure all of the holes are aligned, and then start tightening the pin on the chain with the chain breaker. And as you can see, we're pushing the pin into the chain and pushing this guide pin out of the chain as it fills the space. This is how half-link chains work. This is how I would personally recommend doing this if you aren't going to use a master link, because in my opinion, this is much stronger than a master link is going to be, because you don't have as much of a point of weakness as you do when you have a master link. So if you have a half link chain, this is going to be the way things work, because to my knowledge, there aren't master links when it comes to half links. There's just special pins in the chain that are designed to be taken in and out easier. So you want to look for those. Usually they're wider on half link chains. So that's what you're going to want to do if you have a half link chain, or if you want the strongest possible chain without a master link. Another thing to note if you're going to be installing a chain this way is that you want to make sure that everything lines up whenever you're putting the pin back into the chain, because when it comes to these pins, as you can see, there's very little tolerance between the pin and the plate itself. And if anything is misaligned whatsoever and you force this pin into the chain, you're most likely going to make this hole bigger than it's supposed to be, and it's going to make this a weak point on the chain, as well as it's going to be easier for this pin to come out of the chain itself. So you definitely want to make sure that everything's lined up, and if possible, use a chain breaker like the Shadow one that has a way for you to ensure that everything is lined up when installing the chain. So that's going to be it for this video on how to install a new bike chain. There's a couple things I want to highlight here at the end that you want to make sure you do to ensure that installing your new chain is as fast and as easy as possible. And the first of those is that when you're breaking the chain, or before you break the chain, make sure that you know whether or not you need to break it on an inside plate or an outside plate, because depending on which method you're using to connect your chain, the end plate of the chain itself on each end matters. If you're going to be using a master link, you want to break it so that both ends of the chain are on inside plates. But if you're using the Odyssey Keychain, or you're not using a master link at all, you're going to break it so that one side is on an inside plate and the other side is on an outside plate. On the keychain, or when you're not using a master link at all, you're going to have one end of the chain with outside plates and the other end of the chain with inside plates, so that they match up and you can put the chain back together properly. The Odyssey Keychain comes pre-installed with the master link Allen key plates, and they are always outside plates. So this one, you only have to worry about the other end of the chain being inside plates, whereas if you're not using a master link, you're in control of both ends of the chain. So either way, you just want to make sure that on one end you have outside plates and on the other end you have inside plates, so things line up and you can install the chain properly. The next and possibly more important thing that I want to talk about is that before you break the chain, you need to pay attention to whether or not you're going to have to move your wheel forward or move your wheel backward to compensate for the slack or the lack of slack in your chain. Because most of the time when you get a new chain, even if it's the same one you had before, there is a difference in how much slack or how little slack there is when you install the chain with your wheel where it's currently at. Every single time that I've gotten a new chain, I had to move my wheel either forwards or backwards, and this is something that you have to pay attention to before you break the chain, because sometimes you can't move your wheel forwards or you can't move your wheel backwards, and where your wheel at dictates where you have to break the chain. As I've said several times in this video, it is a huge pain in the butt to re-break a chain or put links back into a chain that you've already broken just to make it work with something, when you could have prevented it just by double checking where the chain needs to be broken before it's actually broken. The last thing that I want to bring up is that when you're getting a new chain, most likely things aren't going to line up the same way they did with your old chain, because chains stretch, the teeth on chain wheels and drivers also stretch, and this is why some people, when they get a new chain, they also get a new chain wheel, sprocket, and driver, because they want to get a whole new drivetrain so that everything works smoothly and you don't get the pops and kinks while pedaling that you do whenever you put a new chain on an old chain wheel and driver. This isn't something that you absolutely have to do, and your bike's going to be fine even if you don't, but it's something that a lot of people do, so it's worth mentioning and keeping in mind when you get a new chain. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you found it useful and it helped you install your new chain. If it did, or you want more tip videos like this one, hit the subscribe button. It's free. There's no reason not to. And thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.